All right, so we are currently short one panelist, but he will hopefully run in slow motion, romantic, all that sort of stuff. All right, so welcome to the crossovers panel. What did we call it? Worlds Beyond? Worlds Beyond. Something like that. I think it was I came up with that, and then no one disagreed with me, so we just ran with it. What we're going to do here is we're going to start off with some introductions. Then we're going to do a short little roundtable discussion, just kind of talking about some topics we've already gone over that we thought were important for you guys to hear about. And then we're going to finish off with a Q&A. So pretty basic panel structure. Should be fun. Hopefully we won't get to everyone's questions, but we should be able to get to as many as we can. Let's
just see how doomed we are. Once we get to Q&A, how many people have questions?
That's good.
Okay.
It'll go up.
Manage that.
Yeah. We'll get there. All right, so introductions. You want to start down that side? We'll go down.
Oh, God. Okay. All right, so I'm a bag of Vicodin. I'm mostly known by the Colbert Report and absolutely nothing else. I'm not mentioning anything else I've written. It's not for this panel. the other panel I suggested that we have got canceled. So not canceled, but denied. So I'm here.
And the third question, which you didn't hear, was what is one fan fiction crossover universe that you like to read or would like to read?
Would like to read Warcraft, like after Wrath of the Lich King, all the way to Cataclysm. I want a huge Deathwing fight. I want Celestia and Discord just going after Deathwing. Hate incarnate. How is that not awesome?
That sounds awesome.
That does sound awesome.
Like.
Well, wait, are we talking about Tentacle Deathwing or Classic Deathwing?
The one that got risen by the Dark Iron Dwarves? The one that came out, the one that's in like the 20-man raid that my guild sucks at? I like G-kicked all of them.
Nerds.
You have to just get on the bolt. If you're not on the bolt.
It's you now.
All right, next guy. Who are you?
Captain Chrysalid. I've written, well, for the purposes of this, a whole lot of crossovers, including Mass Effect, XCOM, Ranma 1/2, My Little Pony, assorted other animes.
Wait, you crossed over My Little
You wrote My Little Pony fan
And
fiction?
I wrote
What a
My
deviant.
Little Pony World of Warcraft crossover. So yeah,
Is it good?
Well, it's.
Are you sure?
It's mostly about jokes and lampshading all of the ridiculous stuff in World of Warcraft. Anyway, that was actually the first one I wrote for this fandom. Anyway, but yeah, so a lot of crossover crap in my background. I shouldn't have said that, shouldn't I?
PG, man. PG.
Stuff.
Yeah.
All right, I am Penstroke. My big thing I'm known for isn't crossover, but like him, the first two things I wrote for the fandom was crossover, which was Better Living Through Science and Ponies, and then Creeping Darkness. The other crossover I've done that I'm really happy and I like, but not a lot of people read, is Little Sugar Shop of Horror, which I like that one.
That was good.
Mm-hmm. And one fan fiction continuity I would like to read, and I actually want to write at some time, if I figure out a good idea for it, would be Despicable Me and My Little Pony.
There you go. Actually,
So fluffy!
if I can, I'd like to answer my third question. I would love to see more Game of Thrones.
Oh, boy.
crossovers, except, of course, we can't legally have those because George R.R. Martin doesn't
That's
like
called
crossovers.
legendary mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like Ron.
No, they don't need to live. It's fine.
It would be so nice.
All right, who's the next guy?
That's me. I'm Alex Straza. I do way too much in this fandom. And my most known crossover probably is The Rise of Iron Mare. If anyone in here has heard of that, I'd be impressed.
I've heard of it.
Well, no,
Yes,
no, no.
yes,
you
yes.
do a technological crossover as well as ponies and mouse pads.
That's true. That's true. You can find my booth downstairs. Anyway,
Literal definition.
Yes.
what was the third thing? Something I want to see? I don't know. Anything in Nicolas Cage, really.
Oh yes, yes.
Literally anything.
If you do not know of his story,
The one true God.
his Nicolas Cage-ness.
Pretty much.
He is Nicolas Cage. I'm 90% sure.
Yeah.
All right, new dude. Who are you?
Aqua.
Okay, not new.
Late dude.
I am Aquaman. I suppose my most well-known crossover would be Harmony, be the Bioshock one. I've done a spiritual, I can call Sky Pirates of Equestria a spiritual crossover with Pirates of the Caribbean. And as far as what I would want to see goes, there was I forget who it was who said it, where it says if you're waiting for someone to write it, that means you should do it yourself. I take that very much to heart, so if there is a crossover I want to see, rest assured it's outlined somewhere on my computer.
I completely
So the
agree.
two I would name for that would be, I guess, Battle Royale and Attack on Titan.
Yeah.
It'll work. Eventually I'll get to this.
I wish. That
Yeah,
ending
like,
was
well,
good.
it's Battle Royale, Hunger Games, spiritual thing for both of them. I saw a bunch of people write a bunch of really bad Hunger Games ones. It's like, hey, I could possibly do that. Like, yeah.
And I'm Cloudhammer. Most well-known crossover for me is My Little Pony, Arceus and the Displaced Village. And as far as setting that I would want to see more of, I'm actually going to go with Ghost in the Shell crossovers.
That's a good one.
I admit I'm a little bit biased. I do have one that I'm started and I'm still toying with, but it's just something I've not seen really anybody do. So I'd love to see some competition.
Somebody go full
in that
alternate
field.
universe and do Samurai Champloo. That would be great. It wouldn't work at all, but it would be great.
Yeah. Just play a straight comedy.
Samurai Champloo.
Samurai shampoo, what? All right, so cool. So I guess last, I am Golden Vision. I am that dude who writes Doctor Who crossovers. I think my best known one is Another Day for the Hooves. Awesome. And yeah, honestly, I'm a simple guy. I like Doctor Who crossovers. I want to see more of them. So, not too complicated. Peter Capaldi, please. Who's excited for Series 8? That's what I thought.
Me too.
See, my fandom's better than yours.
Nerds.
All right, so here's what we're going to do now.
Dorks.
I've got something of a topics list. So we are going to bounce questions around and see what these fine gentlemen have to say about the things we've drawn up. So, are you all ready?
Sure.
Bring it on. All right.
Start from over there.
All right, so let's talk about crossover accessibility. Because often when you are writing or reading a crossover, you're working with two different universes. You've got one thing that some people might know and some other universe that some other people might not know. So what do you have to keep in mind when writing a crossover to make sure that it's accessible to everyone who might want to read it?
I would say it depends first on the nature of the crossover, because there's the two fields of thought. There's inspired by, where you're taking some of the ideas and throwing them in the Pony universe, and then that one doesn't need as much lead-in. But if it's like, oh, Edward Elric showed up in Ponyville, then you may need to give people a little bit more lead-in on who and what Edward Elric is. So,
Who is?
Full Metal Alchemist.
That would be why I don't know what you're talking
Oh,
about.
see, example. Perfect.
Worst weeaboo ever.
I don't know if you can tell by looking at me. I don't watch a whole lot of anime. So,
I never would have guessed.
I'll say first you need a realistic assessment of which of your crossovers is going to be the most popular. Oh, there's always one that's more popular than the other. And you need to understand that most of your readers are probably going to come from that. As an example, and then you have to kind of gauge from then how you're going to handle the introduction. And that can depend, of course, on whether you're using characters from the other universe or whether you're just using the setting of the universe itself. Now, this might not be very clear, but let me bring, for example, Warhammer 40K, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with.
No.
Now,
Nope.
no? Okay. It's a
You
setting
lied.
of grim darkness from the future and orcs and bad stuff. Okay. But the point is, you could either bring in characters from Warhammer 40K, or you could just bring the 40K setting, both of which would be crossed over into something like Friendship is Magic. And I know for certain that there have been Warhammer 40K and Friendship is Magic crossovers of a large variety. So, for example, if you're just bringing in like evil chaos gods start causing trouble, all right, then in that case, you don't really need to spend a whole lot of time, introducing 40K characters or 40K anything like that. You can very easily, bring them up as the danger arises.
Or just use Discord.
Yeah, or use Discord as like an avatar of the Chaos God, so he's not all that Slaneshi. But okay, so the point is, it's a real case-by-case basis, and part of the confusion and the complexity of crossovers is that they can be done in so many ways, whether you're crossing over characters, crossing over settings.
Yeah, so we've got the crossover characters, crossover settings. So crossover settings is like Aquaman's Harmony, where you just take the elements of Bioshock and you take them to Equestria, right?
yeah, it's a spiritual mix between the two. I consider them to be adaptive crossovers. That's the word I use for it. Essentially, what it means is that you are adapting both canons to make a single third thing. I think the metaphor I use for it is when you add the numbers 1 and 2 together, you don't get 12, you get 3. 3 being a different number that contains both of them, but is its own separate, unique entity in and of itself.
So how do you ensure that you keep those flavors but avoid doing a copy-paste crossover?
It's like a good example for that would be Little Sugar Shop of 4. It's like I took the same very kind of situation at the beginning. The cakes are losing their shop to Starbucks, like the flower shop from the movie was failing, and Pinkie Pie finds the perfect little plant to draw in business. But then after that, I let the story go where it would, there's no reason for there to be a dentist antagonist in Ponyville, because Pinkie Pie A isn't trying to swoon some whoever sings the song for the suburban lifestyle.
Not to
Yeah,
mention-
whoever that character is, and then but the antagonist is like the guy of Starbucks, and so that was one reason I had fun writing that one. Is I rewrote the dentist song to be the business baron song.
Well, also, like, Pinkie Pie doesn't even need a dentist.
Yeah.
I don't know how. Like, my
But,
teeth are atrocious, and I don't even eat candy, and I look at her, and I get sad.
But it's like the way I would say it is that the way you get the 3 instead of just having 1 or 2 is that it's like you have to start by putting them both in the same situation and then let the 2 react against each other like a chemical reaction, because you're going to get something out of it.
Yeah, and I think another important thing to bring up as far as character analogs go, this is especially a big problem I had with adapting Bioshock, was that the characters involved in it, without giving away any spoilers, Andrew Ryan's existence is absolutely essential to Bioshock being a story, to anything in it working. The plot of Bioshock is, as aside from a normal universe, like I could take, Captain Crystal was talking about Game of Thrones, you could take the world of Game of Thrones and not necessarily do the same plot, but it would be a spiritual crossover. You could have all the spiritual elements there. But the plot of Bioshock is an essential part of its universe. It is what's going on there.
Yep.
So you have to be able to do analog without doing a copy-paste. So my version of Andrew Ryan in the story, because I had to have an Andrew Ryan, I named her Onyx Rider. I do the very obvious parallel there. But aside from filling the same role in the story and the general plot line that Andrew Ryan does, they are not synonymous characters. Her motivations are slightly different for why she created the City of Harmony. Her backstory and how she got there and how the whole city functions and who she decided to bring in, everything is tailored to something that would fit within the pony world. So as opposed to Andrew Ryan hating, government and big government and capitalism and all that, altruism was his big thing, hated altruism. It's a very different thing for Onyx Rider. She focuses more on what the world of Friendship is Magic focuses on, which is she doesn't like the fact that everything's kind of tailored down to not hurt anyone's feelings. It's sort of similar to altruism, but it's a little bit divergent in the sense that it's kind of an opposition to magical experimentation. Kind of they're stuck in traditionalist ways, and she wants to go further than that and see what else is possible if you take magic to its absolute limit.
So these are spiritual crossovers, like adaptations, right? So you take some elements, you put them in another. But what about more direct crossovers, where you pluck, I don't know, like Halo, just take main character. What's that? Master Chief, yeah, and you pluck him in Equestria. So, I mean, you see those in the featured box pretty often, like they're pretty popular. But what are the more common pitfalls, do you think, in making that kind of just pluck him up and put him over here crossover? What are the major traps in that genre?
With that, I'm speaking from my experience with mine, which is with Pokemon stuff, is the big thing that I see going on in those kinds of settings is that basically the disconnects between that character and then this abrupt setting that they find themselves in is usually either downplayed or just in some cases ignored outright, because in a lot of them it is portrayed as, hey, like a dimensional rift or something like that opens up, characters sucked in, is that you're literally taking them from literally like downtown New York and putting them in
Downtown Manhattan?
well, it's a little bit more extreme than that, but it's like taking someone from Manhattan and dropping them into Papua New Guinea with no prior knowledge of where they're at, and then the character abruptly just picks up and runs with it, like, okay, whatever, not gonna,
It's like,
Yeah.
A common pitfall I see in those kind of stories is when they spend an entire chapter completely making the pace terrible and slow just to try and get like the lore heads on their side. Like when it comes to lore for your crossover, I consider that when it starts off, ambiguity is kind of better than clarity, because you either run the risk of explaining too much and boring the reader, or you run the risk of not explaining enough and they go, I can't care enough about this story to care that it's a good crossover.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of set it up the same way as you do any other story. I mean, the way to make a good crossover from the very start of it, is to assume that every single person reading it has never heard of what you're crossing over with.
Exactly.
You can't assume anybody has prior knowledge of it, because even if they do happen to have prior knowledge of it, it still makes for a sloppy setup. There's still stuff that you're technically leaving out that would be critical to remind people of, even if they're technically aware of it.
Especially if the crossover is very esoteric.
The one thing I would say is that trapping is that people tend to just bring in the protagonists from the other thing, and it's just like, oh, you bring the good guys in to meet the good guys. Well, they're going to have tea and not be able to do much, because most people have their house clean when they have guests over. It's when you bring over the bad guys that I think you can you avoid the pitfall of not having a plot.
Well, not only that, but the side characters too.
Yeah,
that's kind of the reason why side characters exist, is because if the main character didn't have side characters, they would be basically the most boring thing there. They'd be doing everything, but they wouldn't have side characters to bounce ideas off of. They wouldn't have any kind of growth. They wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Your mic's not working.
It's like, for example, a story I saw but I didn't read in the feature box was someone just brought the Scout over from TF2. And while the Scout is a very interesting character and whatnot, it's like part of the reason we like TF2 is because of how all the characters on one team kind of bounce and interact with one another. Just like if we look at our main six, they're better as a whole than they are as the pieces.
I find in most crossovers, the author usually knows enough to bring in not just, one protagonist from another universe, but that protagonist is usually very quickly followed by an antagonist, or he's following an antagonist. I always, and this is a particular problem, especially for sci-fi universes, is the issue of balance. And even if you look back into the darkest ages of the internet, you'll see, Star Wars and Star Trek people, arguing with each other. And so any crossover that occurred between them, would sooner or later devolve into arguments about, turbo lasers, 200,000 gigatons, and other stupid stuff like that. And that's an inevitable consequence of not just sci-fi crossovers, but any sort of military-type crossovers. One example that comes to mind was back in Season 1, I remember there was a Stargate MLP crossover, which you guys might remember. And it was actually very well done, but I do remember in the comments there were people, going on about how effective, P90s would be, how effective gold staff weapons would be, and all this other stuff. And of course, as the author, you think, get over these minute details of stuff. It doesn't matter the bigatons and stuff. But people do care about that, and if you're mindful of your audience, it's usually best to at least try and maintain a reasonable balance between the two universes, even and sometimes that's really hard to balance between the two universes. When I approached this problem with World of Ponycraft, all right, that was one of the big ones, because I had World of Warcraft on one hand and I had MLP on the other. And I kind of went into, I kind of explained it away by just using game mechanics. So, I could say, Twilight, who is, the most powerful unicorn, nonetheless gets pwned by Trixie very early on because she spent all her time doing archaeology instead of leveling. Yeah, so Trixie comes over, she's like, Twilight, let's duel, and she throws down the flag, and Twilight's like, what is this flag doing here? And then the thing counts down, and she gets hit by a fellhound, and that's pretty much the end of it. So, you can find a certain amount of refuge in just ludicrousness, because a lot of these settings are pretty ludicrous, from the meta setting when you think about it. So you don't have to, on one hand, you have to either make it make sense in a concrete way, okay, and then stick with it and not violate it, or you can go the opposite route, which is just say,
be comedic and kind of loosey-goosey.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Batman versus Superman.
oh, God, or who remembers Amalgam back when we were young? Yeah, a few people remember the brief Amalgam universe and how they settled all of the fights by having people vote. And so you had things like Wolverine beating Lobo.
How old are you?
Not that old.
But you take something like, I'm just going to jump off here for a minute, something like Marvel or DC, you've got these darker universes, Bioshock. How do you try to reconcile those tones with the lighter, softer, saccharine world of My Little Pony?
It all really depends the kind of story you're trying to write. Because I actually had that situation when I was doing Creeping Darkness, which is an Alan Wake crossover. Alan Wake is a pretty dark story. It doesn't get into the gore or anything, but it's all about the horror. It's Stephen King style and all that stuff. And so it's a matter of, I actually addressed this in one of the author journals I have Alan Wake writing as he's doing this. Is for him it didn't make sense. It's you can't ask pretty princess ponies to go shooting people in the dark dead with a flashlight and all that stuff. So it's but sometimes if you wrote the story that way, it would have to work. It's making the characters adapt to a situation that they just, I don't know, I don't want to deal with it. No, it's like Fluttershy wanting to hide with her teddy bear when she had to go tell Zecora and Twilight what was going on with Trixie.
I would imagine if you wanted to blend those two moods, you would probably want to start with one that's not ludicrous. Don't bring the DC people, if they're in the middle of a fight, just straight into Equestria, or don't do Pony and then in the same chapter just automatically bring in huge fights.
Yeah, no, that is a very good
Unless
bit.
it's the season 4 finale, in which case I'm fine with
In which
that.
case, by all
Yeah, I was
means,
gonna say,
really,
you have
go
to
all
have-
out.
You have to have a way in, and that's
Yeah.
the most important part of playing the crossover. I would say before you even really figure out the plot in earnest, figure out how you get from Friendship is Magic to whatever you're trying to do.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa, yeah.
It's like-
Whichever the major setting of the academy.
It's there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of been used. It's Discord is a wild card you can use to I'm gonna flunk in.
Well,
Or
not-
just
Though you could say that at this
the
point,
moves
Discord
every
bringing in
single writer.
crossover elements is the broken wing rainbow dash of our time.
Exactly.
Well, the boon to every writer, it's one of my favorite things that it will always be true, is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the best way to get to a really dark storyline is say, okay, here's someone who tried to do something really wonderful and flew too close to the sun. That is essentially how I got Harmony to work, is by saying, all right, they had this idea for a utopia, they had this magical experimentation, all of this stuff that could have been wonderful. It was wonderful for a while, and something came about from it that none of them expected, that they lost control of, and it just descended into chaos
Yeah.
from there. And then you move ahead 10 years, and suddenly you have Harmony, which is this horrific, ugly place that doesn't fit in with Equestria, but you can see all the parts and pieces where it was Equestria and then went horribly wrong somewhere.
Okay, so I'm starting to see some hands going up, so we're going to move on to our Q&A segment now. Thank you guys for the round table. Really great stuff. So let's see, who is going? I saw your hand first. Oh, I'll just bring the mic over.
Just take the mic.
It's just real quick. What was the name of the Stargate MLP crossover what you were mentioned?
I kind of know what you're talking about, and I can't remember.
Yeah,
either.
it was one where the classic Stargate crew went through. There was a gold impersonating Epona, and they had, Epona had
Stargate
brought
Equestria?
over a few. Yeah, it brought over.
He just said that.
Oh, was it just that? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe it had the most obvious
his name
title.
ever.
Stargate Equestria.
It's Stargate Equestria, guys. Just checking.
Hi. In a lot of fan fictions I read that are crossovers between My Little Pony and other fandoms, something I see done, and usually not well, is people trying to make pairings out of characters from My Little Pony and the different fandoms. And I want to know how you guys think that should be done, if it should be done at all.
Okay,
In the
so
words of Kenny Logan, that is the highway to the danger zone right there.
Danger zone!
wait, what?
So it was parents, he said, right?
Parents or pairings.
Pairings.
Okay.
Okay.
Pairings.
So
Shipping.
When you have Commander Shepard do the Commander Shepard thing, except it's in Equestria.
Pony on the Citadel.
I think there's a lot of stuff you have to address. I mean, we'll hand wave the whole human versus horse thing.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do something like that, you have to take into consideration the fact that they are from completely different worlds and timelines, and there's going to be some stuff that doesn't match up. I mean, we could say opposites attract to a certain extent, but at the same time, that's not entirely true. You got to have a few things in common that you can bond over, and You kind of have to boil them down to their basic characters and see what sticks from there.
It's like if a character in another universe is a veterinarian or takes care of animals, then they may connect with Fluttershy. Or if they're a scholar, they may find common ground with Twilight Sparkle. But it's like it has to be something very root level like that.
Yeah, but I
mean, by just the actions of the story could bring them together in ways that they didn't even see coming. But again, it just requires that extra effort to at least put the thought into it first.
There's actually a way I design whenever I have to do a pairing in a show, or really whenever I have to design a character. I have an acronym. I hope Obsolescence is here in somewhere because my acronym is HAT. There you go. He's wearing a hat.
There's the Hat Lord.
So the way the acronym works is I boil every character down to 3 basic traits, that being what makes them happy, which is H, what makes them afraid, which is A, and what gets them into trouble. So those 3 attributes, everything that I think is ever going to feed out of their personality feeds out of those 3 attributes. And if you're pairing, if they don't match up in at least one of those attributes, it doesn't work. They have to either match up in what makes them happy, what makes them afraid, or what gets them into trouble, and that's how they get together.
Well, the way that I also sometimes do it is that I keep in mind the intricacies of their society and civilization. And I figure out exactly how that made them where they are today, kind of like the nature and nurture thing. I look at the nature way more than the nurture because the nurture is usually spelled out in the lore. Whereas the nature you have to actually like look deep into and be like, why is Fluttershy actually like Fluttershy?
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
To an extent, I want to say it's like any cross-cultural, romance that you happen to write. I'm not big on writing this myself, but in theoretically, the biggest hurdle, of course, is the alien factor. What you can often do is just treat the ponies as aliens. That works in some settings where there are already other aliens. In which case, they'll look at the ponies and just think, oh, well, it's odd you're on 4 legs, but otherwise...
They're pretty much technically aliens.
Yeah, pretty much aliens.
You're for some people, as long as it's sapient,
The Jack Harkness principle.
let's do it.
All right, so we just have a quick question over here.
What is your outlook on the Sonic the Hedgehog My Little Pony fanfiction?
Okay, no. There was exactly...
Gotta go fast.
Stop. There was exactly one good one. It was written by Twilight Snarkle. We don't need any more. We're done.
Wait, which
There was one
wait,
good one.
What was the question?
That was the one about Robotnik.
Best Hedgehog?
Order from Chaos.
I actually challenged the fandom to make a better Sonic crossover than Twilight
No.
Snarkle.
You know not which of which you speak. Your meddling in forces beyond your comprehension.
You're disqualified, Gary.
All right, next question.
It's Sonic, so it's automatically going to get hated by most people. But if you can do it, go ahead and give it a try. Maybe you can turn.
Just
I
know
kid
that you are
around-
stepping on a mine, and you're kind of hoping it doesn't blow
I
up.
kid around because it's definitely got a reputation. So, you know the reputation.
Right.
I was thinking of writing a crossover where the ponies are interacting with my own OCs, but I want to know how to write that without confusing anyone.
Well, I would say the one thing you want to do, especially when dealing with OCs, and I said this in the do's and don'ts panel, is lead in with the characters that people are coming to read about for My Little Pony fan fiction. It's like, that's what we want to read. We want to read about Twilight, we want to read about Celestia, we want to read about Sakura or Maud or one of them. Lead in with one of them and get people interested in the story based on the pony aspects of it. That's also kind of why Fanfiction has the rule, until you hit the pony in a crossover, you can't post it about it. And so it's like leading in with the main characters that lets people get interested, and then you can kind of slowly bring in the original characters and kind of like, it isn't, oh, it's just about them. No, it's kind of, oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay, come here.
That also kind of goes off of what I said earlier, because I would imagine that with all of these OCs, if you're starting on the first chapter, you probably have to characterize them. And I will also presume that that'll take at least 5,000 to 10,000 words in order to characterize them remotely correctly. So again, you're going to bore your audience if you start off with the OCs. Just fact.
This is superb advice from this guy.
As
right
well
here.
as using...
Always.
It's like I was actually thinking in the other panel, trying to think, did I ever break that? Am I a hypocrite, and did I ever break that rule? And I can't think of an example of anything, so
Always
I'm not hypocrite on that.
Always start with the canon characters, and if you have to introduce OCs,
Yeah, you did,
I
huh?
would advise you to introduce the OCs from the perspective of the canon character.
At
And-
least Nyx was in
because
chapter 2, right?
basically,
Yeah, no, Nyx wasn't even in the first chapter either.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So next question. I think this is leading off of that one.
So how does that apply to Fallout Equestria?
I don't like Fallout
All right,
Equestria.
how long
so
do we get in for those mentioned? Wait, 29 minutes before that quiz open.
What's your question?
Okay.
No.
So,
Hold on.
to avoid
Answering seriously, aside from I love or hate you Fallout Equestria, I
No,
personally enjoyed it.
I
but
actually have a serious answer.
in all seriousness, what we went into Fallout is expecting the whole Fallout universe, and the people who played Fallout were looking for recognizable things. They would say, "Oh, it's a vault that we recognize," or "It's the theme of a vault that we recognize." And KCAT included a lot of those in there. So there was no actual vault dweller. There was no actual chosen one. Okay, but we'd still hear about the Enclave. We heard you got that little Paris Sprite bot, and you think, oh, it's just like the President Eden thing in Fallout 3. So there were familiar faces. When we say start with the canon, okay, we don't mean you have to start with a canon character strictly, but with something that's familiar to the reader.
You could definitely start with video game
like
canon
Candorlock,
characters.
for
Here's
example.
what we're actually saying is at the beginning of your story you need a hook, and the easiest hook is to have canon characters there. It is entirely possible to do a hook that does not involve canon characters. It's a lot more difficult. You're kind of running on the wild side of things there, but it's absolutely possible to do. I think KCAT did it well by doing what Chrysalid was talking about, by doing, instead of being familiarity with Friendship's Magic, it's being familiarity with Fallout.
Yeah.
And you can go from either direction and move towards the middle, or you can just start with OCs or just have a good hook that makes you want to keep reading the story regardless of what it's a crossover with.
Despite, it's like, one could easily argue that Fallout Equestria is more Fallout crossed over with My Little Pony, not vice. Yeah, exactly. It's not really Pony with Fallout Equestria.
It's Fallout Equestria with Pony.
Exactly. It's like, it's a matter of order thing. And so in that case, she did start off with the thing that was the canon and the strong thing, the thing that people recognize, as you were saying. And in that, it doesn't have to be characters, as you were pointing out. It can be locations. Like, we can be talking about the castle of the Royal Pony Sisters, and people will get interested in it because, like, oh, this is a mysterious castle with an organ that runs trap doors. And it's like, who built that, Luna Celestia or Stars World? And who thought it was funny?
Also, can I point out that
All
our
right,
panel's
so-
crossed over with Transformers now?
So we just have a quick question here from my friend Tony. He wants you to give him the hardest crossover you can think of.
The hardest crossover.
Okay, you know what? So you already said it earlier. I'm going to say it. I think Game of Thrones would be the hardest crossover I can think of to do. I can't imagine how you would do that.
Game of Thrones
accurately.
is extremely hard to cross.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen a few people who have done it, and it's hard simply because of the sheer depth of material that's there and the intricacy of the world that you either have to adhere to, or if you throw it off to the side, and then it loses the Game of Thrones flavor. So, yeah, any sort of Game of Thrones in general crossovers are going to be very challenging, I would say.
Probably a good RuneScape crossover. Like, good, not just...
Just do 200,000 words of grinding, and that's basically
As
it.
an aside, Tetris.
Tetris.
I think there was like a Tetris Mario crossover at one point. All right, next question.
If you're trying to do like a parody of a crossover, for example, Fallout Equestria, which has many, what are the elements you have to use?
So you want to parody a crossover that already exists, or you want to just parody the concept of a crossover? Okay, so
The concept.
it's like,
Okay.
then like point out. It's like you can definitely use the things that are like common factors of the insanity of how did they get there?
How did they speak the same language already?
Yeah.
Why does everyone instantly resort to shooting the other person in the face?
Why is Commander Shepard so devilishly handsome?
How many hundreds of pounds of things do you have in your backpack?
How do you carry those even though you're a Philly? Stuff like that.
My advice would say, go through your favorite crossover, identify the most ridiculous things, make a quick little list of them, and then make it so it's not just ridiculous things that you don't like, ridiculous things that you love, too.
You basically have to mystery science theater.
Yeah,
it.
find.
That being said, if your favorite crossover is something I wrote, don't do that. That's not good.
I mean, from my own crossover, almost all of World of Ponycraft was that. At the time I wrote it, I was actually in Cataclysm and kind of losing my interest in World of Warcraft. But I still loved it, and I had a lot of fond memories of it.
What a nerd.
You were about to say Ponycraft.
Well, it was whatever. So I had put in a lot of my memories of playing it in college and with my guildies and all that other stuff, and I thought, you know what, it was fun, and I bet the ponies could have fun if they were in a MMORPG. And so it arrived from basically me lampshading all the ridiculous stuff that was in World of Warcraft via Twilight.
But you also have to keep in mind that can get old after a while.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well,
That's
You have to be tactful about it,
that's
basically.
why you don't drag it on for more than...
It's like for those who know Full Metal Alchemist, it's like the short joke. It's something that
Yeah.
wonderfully breaks the moment, but you can't use it too often.
I
Otherwise
hated
it loses
that
its
after the
punch.
second episode.
What?
I hated that after the second episode.
All right, so next question over here.
What would your tips be for writing a crossover with a series that's already a crossover? Like my example is Kingdom Hearts.
Wait, what?
Kingdom Hearts.
They're asking what if
I
you have
A crossover that's already a crossover.
Or a multiverse kind of thing.
Kingdom Hearts.
It's like you have to be really careful to keep like to juggle all the balls in the air. This is a metaphor that Silver Quill explained on panels in Everfree Northwest a few years back. It's like when you're writing a story, especially a crossover, it's like, oh, I'm crossovering these two worlds. Well, that's one ball. If you add in another, that's two. There's only so many balls people can juggle as readers and as writers. And at some point, you're going to hit your limit, and at some point, the reader's going to hit your limit.
I would
So-
imagine that would be part of the moment where you would actually want to take out some of the intricacies of the thing that Kingdom Hearts crosses over
Yeah.
and just be like, no one cares.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll add that there have been many successful quote-unquote mega crossovers,
Yeah.
which are crossovers which involve 10, 12. I've seen crossovers with more than 20 components.
I'm actually trying one with like 7 right now. That's why I haven't written anything.
The best one that actually comes to mind was I read one that another author of mine. He wasn't an MLP author, but he wrote a one where it was kind of like to Yesterday's Enterprise, I think it was, where the example was there were a whole bunch of like these starships that were being sucked into this one sector of space, and so we just crossed over everything from like Frenchy Tenchi Muyo to. Parallel, boy, there's this guy, he knows this stuff. So yeah, and they brought in all this stuff, and they brought in like one Commander Shepard, and then the Commander Shepard from Stargate Atlantis, and
That's just getting a little out of hand, isn't it?
I'm Shepard.
There were like 4 Commander Shepards, and they were like Shepard, Rex, Shepard.
Can you like send that to me?
Please. All right, next
It's
question.
done. You just have to be disciplined about it.
That, and it's like the one thing that, from the sounds of it, it lends itself to be a bit sillier. The more things you try to cross over.
Yeah.
So that's the one concept. Is like if you want it to be super serious, you may want to start cutting some of your extras. As like maybe I don't need Star Trek, Deep Space Nine if I want all the Star Treks or something like that.
Yep. Okay. Next question.
Do the readers who come to read your Halo crossover and follow you stay to read your slice of life, stories?
So what's the
No.
cross appeal?
Well, it all depends. If someone really likes you for your writing, it's like they may start looking at some of your other writing. But generally speaking, it's like if you do the Halo crossover, they read it for the Halo, not the pony, and then everything else you have is pony on Fanfiction. They may not, but at the same time, it's still you're exposing yourself to people outside the fandom with the crossover material.
Sometimes it's rare.
It's
I would
rare.
say like 1 out of 10 possibly. If they read one of your like stories, would probably go on to your next one because you see all of the favorites and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would probably say like it goes 1 to 10 going to one of your other stories, and then it just goes downhill from there. Like it goes like 1 to 20 and 1 to
What you have to
30.
remember is MLP is, in all honesty, is MLP.
Yeah.
So the people who want to read it are going to read it, and the people who don't want to read it aren't going to read it. I know from my experience there isn't too much bleed over from, for example, my Ranma 1/2 into my Friendship is Magic, or vice versa. To an extent, you're writing for niche audiences.
Yeah, it's easy to get typecast on Fanfiction.
Yeah.
You have someone who might start out writing mature stories and then end up trying to do something else, and his followers don't like that. It's really easy to just
With
get lost in what you're known for.
Crossovers, you're already subjectively or objectively limiting your audience because you decide I'm going to go with a source material that has the capability to completely lose the reader. It's not like writing Past Sins or something where you're just like, okay, this is just 100% normal and original, and whatever.
Most crossover readers are going to have to at least be able to stomach both parts of the crossover. So yeah.
It's like they may not know about Despicable Me or Bioshock, but they at least need to be able to tolerate its elements.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
What about fan fictions that aren't exactly crossovers, but but rather having characters from either universe as a guest star?
Guest star.
Guest star.
I think this is a question for you, Vicodin.
Okay, so I think a good example would be the Colbert Report, which is literally just taking Stephen Colbert and throwing him in Equestria. I actually had a plot around it, which is why it stopped, because I wrote myself in a corner. I would suggest that you do not have those stories be longer than like 10,000 words, because A, it'll get old, B, the character might not even have the capability to need to be there in the first place. Like, I just threw them in there because I watched too much Colbert in one night. I I marathoned like 2 weeks, but I guess the best advice that I would give is that treat it as if it's a guest star. Have it be short, have it be special, and have it not wear out its welcome.
Don't do the Scooby-Doo thing.
Or the one thing is like, the other one thing to do is like, to have a guest star that may be portrayed in a larger story is you need to get the equivalent. Weird Al is a perfect example of this. It's like, he isn't Weird Al in Equestria, he is a semi-equivalent character cheese sandwich. So
I was just saying like regular guest stars, like if we threw like Emma Watson in there. Like she doesn't have a possible pony that we can compare, but again, there's a reason they're called guest stars and not...
Yeah.
Margaret Thatcher in Equestria.
Get on this featured box. All right, next question.
That's my assignment for everyone here. Margaret Thatcher in Equestria. Someone, please.
So, my question is not just a question, but also a comment. I've seen a very large number of dark settings crossed over into the Pony universe, and a lot of them actually work really well. One example would be Fallout Equestria, which actually has quite a following behind it. I've also seen some that are getting to the point of no return dark, such as one that was the Changeling invasion episode, which was instead of the one in the show, was more like War of the Worlds, with tripods and all. And another one was actually Predator. Again, with a changeling, this one an individual hunting magic users, in this case, Twilight, for sport.
What's the question?
I'm the wrong person to ask. That sounds badass.
So the question is, what do you think of these extremely dark?
It's all about a person's preferences, I'd say, because like people tolerate and seek out different varying degrees of dark. Some people like the Predator style things where it's like you're being hunted and da 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 da.
Again, dark is like crossover. The more darker you get, you are limiting your audience immediately.
Yeah.
But some people like dark.
Yeah, some people like dark.
I mean, some people like it pitch black, freaking onyx. I can't see the light. Someone kill me now.
You can only see with supersonic Zubat echolocation dark.
Yeah. And that's just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's just you're focusing more and more in on a niche audience within a niche audience already. So
yeah, and that's fine. Like, that's your choice. You're writing the story. You can make it as dark as you want, but you need to keep in mind that your choices on your story are immediately going to do whatever to all of your readers. Like, I wrote a story called, this is not a crossover, but I wrote a story called Dash's New Mom, which basically started off in the first chapter as a comedy, and then I completely rewrote it to a sad fic, and I lost like a third of the reader base within a week. So you also have to keep in mind rewriting. You have to keep in mind the genres that you're going to stick with, because they most likely, like a certain amount of them will not stick around if you change it.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
I was wondering about if any of you read the Hard Reset series.
I've read it, yeah.
I've heard of it. When does it stop being a crossover to you and become something original? Because that was like something that was a lot like the inspiration was taken from something like Groundhog Day, for example.
Well, we have someone who started the Groundhog Day fad.
Yeah, that's the kind of spiritual thing that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's a spiritual crossover. That is like 3 is equal to 1 plus 2 and whatnot. And arguably, it's like I honestly haven't read the Hard Reset series, so people can boo me if they want. But exactly. But it's like it's also it may not be focusing in on a specific thing. It's crossovering. It may just be using the trope, because that is a known trope of you're stuck repeating the same day.
Or homage.
What?
Like a homage
or
to
a
a trope
homage,
too.
Where it's like it's not specifically focusing on one thing, but it's taking inspiration from maybe anything that does that idea.
Also-
Groundhog Day is a famous example, but like I saw an episode of Space Dandy who did the groundhog concept.
I also want you to, like the audience, I also want them to keep in mind that it was not really Groundhog Day that was crossed over. It was literally just the trope. And imagine
Yeah.
how a good and really, really good story I would consider was pulled out of just one trope.
Yeah.
So
Tropes
just
are not
keep that in
bad.
mind.
Well, I mean, I wrote The Best Night Ever, which was the original Groundhog Day, My Little Pony thing. But, you
Before
know,
it
and I
was
can
cool?
see what you mean, because when I did it, it was a very faithful take on it, to the point of it was not about the loop itself, it was about a character gaining wisdom and perspective through the loop, in that case, Blue Blood.
Which
Being-
echoes a lot more closely to Groundhog Day.
Exactly. I mean, it was very much from beginning to end styled to be the My Little Pony version of Groundhog Day. Hard Reset is another type of animal in that it uses the basic premise of the loop and about being trapped in the loop. And there is some, you know, character development, but it's largely about, it goes, all right, the middle of the time loop, all right, is always the breaking down factor. It's where the character is at his most low, where the character realizes their helplessness, all right? And Twilight was basically stuck in that, in the sort of hopelessness, all the way to the end of Hard Reset, which was what made it darker and what made it deviate from the norm. Because instead of bouncing back up from that low point, okay, and then realizing the epiphany that they have about, you know, living life for the present and all that sort of stuff, the wisdom aspect. And that's why Twilight ended Hard Reset, you know, as a very troubled individual instead of as an individual who had achieved a measure of enlightenment. So what you're talking about is definitely a deviance. It's within the same family of this crossover type, but it's gone off into its own way. And you can consider that divergent point, I guess, the middle of Hard Reset to be when it became something
Its own
else.
thing.
Something its own thing, yeah. All right, next question.
That was clear.
First thing about the predator thing, if you want to make that less dark, have the ponies be the predators. But other than that, my question's about starting with OCs. What if you're working on something that's basically a historical setting? So you're starting with the history of Equestria, and so the crossover aspect comes in with the whole, you know, where did the Castle of the Two Sisters come from and that sort of thing, but that comes at the end of the story. So how do you deal with when most of the characters are OCs because they're pre-modern Equestria?
All right, so just to verify, it's a question of how to bring in the canon and bring in the hook when you're doing something that's 100 years before Twilight and anybody else.
Yeah,
It's
chronologically.
Make your own plausible canon.
Or it's like use places. It's like Ponyville may not have been founded, but Canterlot has been founded. We have the benefit of a few immortal characters like Celestia, Luna, Discord. It's like you can have them start the conversation around the Discord statue. Or the Everfree Force. It's like some of these locations have been around a lot longer than the cast has been.
Ponyville could have probably been part of the Everfree Forest before it was Ponyville.
Exactly.
There,
Why
idea
not?
right there. Take it.
I mean, another thing I would suggest is reading alt fiction, of which there's a great deal. I mean, you can start with Turtle Dove, who has his problems, but nonetheless is a good intro into the sort of alt fiction genre where they have, you know, former world leaders from like World War II or the Civil War. All right, and they're both, you know, based off of the original characters, the historical character, but they have their own, you know, kind of personality. So you would not be the first person who's looking at historical characters and writing about them. So the best thing, if you're in that sort of situation, I advise you to look at some alt fiction or even some movies.
I saw a really hilarious book that teamed up Sigmund Freud and Sherlock Holmes.
Oh boy.
Well, I guess you could do that.
All right,
Like-
quick question over here. We're going to be going to the next one.
The Conan Doyle one.
If there was an all-out war between Care Bears and My Little Pony, which one will win?
Ponies win.
I think ponies.
Ponies.
Ponies? All right, ponies
got
win.
acorns on their
Yeah,
side. Care Bears
it's,
don't
it's
count.
like the only superpower I'm aware the Care Bears have, and this is like, it's the Care Bear stare, and it's like.
They are bears, so they could maul.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's like I guess it depends how dark you make the bears. It's
They
like
don't
Predator.
even have claws.
Yeah, that's true.
You find them rummaging around in the trash out there.
All right, I think we're just going to call it at that and move on. All right, next question.
Okay. when you have two in action-oriented stories where there's combat, fighting, how do you write two crossover characters from different universes without being biased? Like, how do you compare their strengths and weaknesses without being biased at the end?
Can I answer this?
Go for it.
Right. I have written a lot of action stuff, especially when it comes to mixing, real life military stuff with anime. And when I first started doing that, that was really hard, and I went through a whole lot of revisions, because how do you have outlandish, ridiculous anime calling out, their attacks, all right, and then, juxtapose that with the fact that, someone just snipes them from like 100 meters away.
It's a good job, mate.
Yeah, it's very tough to balance it, and there's no easy way, because it depends almost exactly on what you're crossing over with what. And the best way to do it is to just write a few different versions and try and have it balanced, be short to start with, okay, and balanced without one side curb stomping the other, which is, I assume, what you want. Anyone can write a curb stomp. That's pretty easy.
Also, like I said, with the intricacies, be aware of what damage does on attacks in their world, and then just try and figure out like the scientific calculation of where it would be if it was in the pony world. Like if Ryu did a Hadouken, is that equivalent to a Twilight magical bolt thing that she fired in Counterlot?
Well, if it goes through a mountain, then...
If you try and take it too seriously, you
Yeah,
end up
if you
people
take it-
bring out the outliers like
Yeah.
Hadouken destroying that Ayers Rock in Australia, which is...
Just make lots of spreadsheets or something with power levels. All right, get a scouter.
He had a question. Do we
Well, we're going to go over here, then we're going to go over there, okay?
Okay, go.
All right, what's your question?
Do you ever have problems keeping the personalities of characters intact when you're crossing them over? Say you take, I don't know, like a Spyro and throw him in the My Little Pony universe. Would you ever have problems like that?
I think that comes back to you need to bring the support characters, because the support characters are what will bring out the identifiable and recognizable traits of the character, of the main character. So, like Spyro, doesn't he have a girlfriend?
Depending on which series you're
He
rolling
is?
with.
So, like-
Or Dragonfly.
Or Dragonfly.
I mean, the main thing that I always try to keep in mind when I'm, regardless of how many crossover characters I'm bringing over, is that you basically have to pick your starting points, and with crossover material you have that very nicely defined because you are using pre-existing characters for the most part. But you have to keep in mind that these characters don't live in a bubble. It's not like they're dreaming this and then they're going to wake up and be the same character that they were before. Eventually their personality is going to change because the events that are happening to them now are not the same as what they're used to. And so they are going to change and become different characters from what they were when they started.
Also, you can make the MLP side characters possible side characters for the person that goes into the world. Okay, next question.
Yep. All right, next question. By the way, guys, we have only about 7 minutes left, so fortunately we can't get through all of your questions, but we will be here after the panel and then in Quills and Sofas afterward. So if we can't get to you, we apologize, but feel free to come up and ask them anyway. All right, so next question.
Where do you draw the line between crossovers and parodies? Because I'm hearing Fallout Equestria being called a crossover, but from what I've read so far, it doesn't have the actual Fallout characters. It's just ponies parodying Fallout. How do you draw the line between the two?
The difference between what you're thinking about is where a crossover would be with Fallout characters in it. It's a slightly different kind of crossover than what Fallout Equestria is, which is more of an adaptation of Fallout into the world of Friendship is Magic. Those are two divergent different types of crossovers. As far as parody goes, I think it's kind of hard to say. It's kind of, the old congressional hearings about porn. I'll know it when I see it. You kind of have to feel it out and say, all right, does this feel like it's tongue-in-cheek? Does it feel like they're doing this silly thing because they're trying to mock it, ironically, or are they just genuinely doing it? It's just unfortunate.
It also depends a little bit on the author's intent. If
Yeah,
the author's
it's definitely the way that you portray the thing, because I will always call Kill la Kill a parody of an anime until the end of time, even though it literally became its own. I said literally. Even though it became its own thing and became like a good anime, but it's a parody of pretty much everything in anime from start to finish.
Yeah, parodies can have good stories.
Parodies can have good stories.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is one big parody of sci-fi tropes, and it works because Douglas Adams. All right, so we have a question over here from Deadpool, who has crossovered himself into our universe to ask it.
Because it's a convention and we need a Deadpool here somewhere.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Why don't you ask your question?
hold on. I got to take this thing off. All right, that's better. All right. Let me ask my question. All right. So my question is about amalgam characters. I want to know what your opinion is on, say, well, like Deadpool and cheese sandwich being combined into cheese pool, or Harley Pie over here. You know, what are your thoughts on that whole ponifying of other characters from other canons and fandoms?
I didn't know I wanted a cheese pool till now. Someone write that.
Just want to dive in.
I like that idea.
cheese
That's
and-
good. Let's do it.
I feel that there's really only room for one. Like I feel that there's not enough room for like a Deadpool and Pinkie Pie scene more than once or twice.
What if cheese sandwich is one of the voices in Deadpool's head?
Do it.
But,
Head canon accepted.
I would say it's like in that situation where it becomes an inspired by crossover where you're letting characters we know fall into the roles of other things. Like you have Pinkie Pie and Harley Quinn as your chair neighbor over there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's where I was mentioned earlier about the difference between analog and copy-paste. I think you can actually have characters who are analogs, but if you were going to put Pinkie Pie in the role of Harley Quinn, there would have to be a lot of dominating traits that still make her Pinkie Pie. I think you still have to emphasize that she still is Pinkie Pie, but is doing a bunch of things that would make her Harley Quinn, which is it's kind of a hard pill to swallow because Harley Quinn does some kind of twisted things.
It would have
I
to
think
be
you have
like-
to have an interesting way to get into that and justify that. But
I'm
it
kind
could
of
be done.
having the idea of like it's just part of her clique. It makes her clique happy. Like she just gets different kinds of friends, so she's doing all of this psychotic and crazy shit because it brings a smile to the Joker's face or something.
Did we
Like,
we
you
use
would-
up our
That
curse
is
word
an
quota for
interesting
the
way
panel?
to look at that is an interesting way to look at Pinkie Pie as a character. Is she is a foil? She is the foil of what makes the friends around her happy.
Yeah.
It's like
An empty box brings a
actually how I
smile
write
to
her,
Joker's
yes.
face. He's not the hardest person in class.
Yeah. All right. Next question.
Do you guys think that there would be like a minimum of amount of crossovers, like if you want to not overdo per chapter, or if you would say only throw in one crossover per chapter, or like only one crossover for the whole story?
For if you're looking for a story that's multiple crossovers, or just
Well, if you took a story with multiple crossovers, do you think you would have a minimum per chapter, like if you only did one per chapter, or say
Well,
if
the
you
thing
had
is,
a minimum for the whole
I guess
story?
I guess it's kind of the type of story you want to tell.
Yeah.
I mean, like, if say you're doing something like it was mentioned earlier with Kingdom Hearts, that kind of format could work well with that chapter-to-chapter mentality to at least prevent bleed over and getting too complicated to follow. But I mean, like Aquaman said, it's just down to what you're trying to achieve, and that's purely your vision on that.
As long as it doesn't get tiring to read, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine you could cross over 1-2 things in a chapter if it's like 10,000 words, but you do imagine that those thousands of words really do add up the more that you're like making them interact and talk.
Yeah.
Like, you'd be surprised at how quickly you could tire a reader out.
But yeah, no, there's examples of it, like the Sweetie Belle Chronicles by the guy I'm staring at right here, where it's like it is that kind of almost episodic thing where it's like one character going through a bunch of different situations that are from different universes and different situations and
Yeah,
all
and
that stuff.
It's definitely an easier way if you just format it so that the reader from the start is just like, okay, we're having one crossover a chapter, and then maybe
It allows the reader kind of like set up the divisions in their brain and
yeah, that's not where ambiguity is better than clarity.
Yeah.
Clarity on where the reader knows where this is going to go is pretty much ideal.
Just be honest with your readers then.
Yeah,
Make sure that they
honesty.
know what they're getting themselves into. All right.
the honest truth.
All right. Next question, and possibly the last. I don't know how much time we'll have after this. So.
We have 2 minutes.
We have 3 minutes.
So, when you're taking a character from like another universe and turning them into a pony, like I've had a lot of trouble like deciding if they're going to be a Pegasus, a unicorn, or Earth pony. Like my friend and I usually write together, and we've had hour-long discussions just on one character trying to figure it out.
What character?
Yeah,
Like,
give us
it
a
was-
character example.
Yeah. Just
Well, we usually like take Minecraft YouTubers, honestly.
This
but
will be
it's always just different characters. Like it's always just usually different.
Well, let's just like pick out a random character.
Sonic?
No. Shut up.
Naruto?
Let's just do the Joker for example.
Joker.
The Joker is possibly could be either a unicorn or an Earth pony just because of his depending on the
No, Joker's an Earth pony.
Yeah, Joker's an Earth
Joker's
pony,
an
man.
Earth pony. There's an inferiority complex.
It's like
Yeah.
it's the fact that he would try to defy the social norms of the stuff
Yeah,
and
probably.
like
And it's because like the essential critical thing of Batman is that he doesn't have any superpowers. Like he's just doing it out of his own ingenuity and his own strength. So he's got to be an Earth pony. And I think
I
his
agree.
opposite half has got to be an Earth pony too.
Possibly,
Yeah.
you could possibly make Batman a Pegasus just for the gliding, but in general,
I think
yeah,
it'd be cool to have an Earth
I would
pony
honestly
with
make them
technology
both.
that allows him to
I'd make
fly
them
stuff.
both Earth ponies just because they both are pretty much reliant on what they could do with each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to kind of find the theme, the central
Yeah.
themes of the character, and then as best you can, because nothing's going to fit perfectly, as best you can, just kind of work it into where it fits.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just
All right.
general rule of thumb, there usually shouldn't be an alicorn.
Always an
Safe rule.
alicorn. Just
Yeah.
make everyone into an
Stay
alicorn.
off that
In
one if you
OC,
can.
it should probably have wings and a horn. Make it 3 horns.
3 wings. All right. All right, guys, that's all the time we have for today. Sorry. Thank you for coming out. If you did not get to ask your question, they will still be here after the panel and in Quills and Sofas afterward. Thank you again for coming out, everyone.